1. Absence speaks louder than word. There are moments in life when words lose their value, when explanations are no longer needed. Instead, it's your absence that begins to communicate the most powerful message. You don't need to argue, plead, or explain your worth. Sometimes, the best response is simply no response at all. When you walk away not out of anger, but from a place of peace, you create space. And in that space, something unexpected happens. Your presence, once overlooked, becomes felt. The silence you leave behind echoes far deeper than anything you could have said. She may not say it out loud. She may not even fully understand it herself. But the change in your behavior, the stillness where there was once effort, creates a noticeable shift. That shift doesn't scream. It doesn't seek attention. It simply exists. And over time, it speaks volumes. In a world where people are constantly trying to prove themselves, validate their feelings, and win arguments, your silent withdrawal becomes rare. It shows a level of self-respect and emotional maturity that isn't common. You're not trying to make anyone feel bad. You're just choosing not to be part of something that drains your peace. And this absence, it's not meant to hurt. It's meant to heal. For you, it's the beginning of emotional independence. For her, it may be the first time she truly begins to reflect, not because you told her to, but because you stopped trying to be understood. Stoic philosophy teaches us to focus only on what we can control: our actions, our emotions, our choices. You can't control how others treat you, but you can control how long you tolerate it. Choosing silence isn't weakness. It's a quiet declaration that you value your peace over attention. Eventually, your absence becomes a mirror. And in that mirror, people often see what they never noticed when you were present. They remember your calm, your patience, your efforts. But by then, you're already walking a different path, one that no longer seeks validation, but instead moves with quiet purpose. 2. Detachment is not cruelty, it's clarity. Sometimes when you take a step back, people assume you're being cold. But detachment isn't about hurting anyone. It's not about being harsh or emotionless. Detachment is about gaining clarity, about seeing things for what they really are, not what you hoped they would be. In any connection, especially emotional ones, there comes a moment when you pause and ask, is this helping me grow, or is it draining me? If the answer is the latter, then detaching isn't a reaction, it's a decision. You're not punishing her. You're simply stepping back to protect your peace, your focus, and your emotional energy. And in this stillness, you begin to see things you missed before. The patterns, the imbalances, the effort that was one-sided, and most of all, the need to return to yourself. Stoicism teaches that real strength lies in not being controlled by desire, approval, or fear. A detached man isn't heartless. He's simply rooted in self-awareness. He doesn't push people away. He just stops holding on to what no longer holds him. This form of distance isn't loud. It's not filled with blame or explanations. It's gentle, quiet, grounded. You're not walking away to make someone regret losing you. You're walking away because you finally realize you don't need to stay where you're not seen clearly. Many misunderstand detachment as avoidance, but in truth, it's presence with your own needs, values, and priorities. You're not escaping. You're realigning. And sometimes, it's only when you detach that the other person starts to notice what they overlooked. Your steady presence, your efforts, your silence. But by then, your goal is no longer to be noticed, it's to move forward with peace. Detachment isn't cruelty, it's self-respect. It's saying, I wish you well, but I choose me. 3. Indifference is the real power move in relationships and interactions. People often expect a reaction. Whether it's love, anger, jealousy, or attention, many rely on your emotional response to feel relevant. But the most powerful response isn't anger. It's not even silence. It's true indifference. Indifference doesn't mean you stop caring about life. It means you stop attaching your worth to how someone else treats you. You no longer seek their validation or fear their rejection. You become emotionally self-sufficient. When she says something to provoke a response, and you remain calm. Strength, when she distances herself, expecting you to chase, but you continue living your life. That's power. Not because you're playing a game, but because you've already stopped depending on external approval. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." Indifference is rooted in this very principle. You no longer react out of impulse. You respond only when it aligns with your values. You don't beg for attention. You don't argue to be understood. You observe. You remain present, but detached. That emotional neutrality is rare, and because it's rare, it becomes magnetic. People feel the shift, they notice the calm, and often, it makes them reflect in ways your words never could. Indifference is not the absence of emotion, it's the control of emotion. It's choosing not to let someone else pull you out of alignment. You're not cold, you're centered. This mindset gives you freedom. You no longer need to force outcomes. You no longer base your happiness on how someone else responds. You let go not out of bitterness, but because you've grown past the need for emotional games. Ironically, when you reach this state of calm, detachment, that's often when others begin to feel your absence most, because they can no longer influence you. And that quiet shift in dynamic speaks louder than any confrontation ever could. Stoicism teaches us that the most powerful man is the one who remains unaffected. And in a world full of overreaction, your indifference becomes your strength. 4. She notices when you stop trying in the beginning. It's the little things, your effort, your consistency, your attention. Even if they go unnoticed at first, they were always there. You reached out, you showed up, you cared. And often, those efforts were taken for granted, not necessarily out of malice, but because they were constant. But Stoicism teaches, do not waste what remains of your life in speculating about others. Instead, be concerned only with what you can control. That includes your energy, your focus, your time. When you stop trying not out of anger, not to create distance, but simply because you've outgrown the need to prove anything, that's when things begin to shift. Not outwardly at first, but subtly, silently. She notices, maybe not immediately, but slowly, the absence of your effort becomes visible. She notices you're no longer the first to text. She notices your tone is no longer filled with expectation. She notices your presence is still, but not seeking. And more importantly, she notices that the space you once filled is now quiet. This shift is not about making her feel regret. It's not a tactic, it's a realization. You've come to see that one-sided effort is not sustainable. That true connection requires mutual care. And when that balance is missing, trying harder doesn't restore it. Letting go does. You don't announce the change. You don't post it or speak it. You simply stop offering what is no longer appreciated. You retreat inward, not as an act of defense, but as a return to your own center. And this inner withdrawal, this subtle pulling back, echoes louder than any argument could. Not because it's done to cause pain, but because it reflects clarity. Your silence is no longer a pause, it's a decision. Your calm is no longer waiting, it's acceptance. And in that stillness, she begins to notice what she didn't before. The calm reliability you once brought, the steady support, the quiet presence. But by then, you're no longer trying to be noticed. You're simply being peaceful, grounded, whole. And that, more than anything, speaks volumes. 5. Silence creates space for reflection. There comes a point when words lose their meaning, not because they were wrong, but because they were spoken too often without being truly heard. And that's when silence becomes necessary. Not as a punishment, but as a mirror. When you go silent, it's not always about ending communication. Sometimes, it's about giving both people the space to listen to what was never said out loud. Silence has a way of revealing truth. It doesn't force, it allows. It creates distance, not for separation, but for clarity. For her, your silence becomes noticeable not immediately, but gradually. The absence of your voice, your check-ins, your presence, it all begins to echo. Not because you're trying to make her miss you, but because you're finally letting the space speak for itself. Stoic philosophy teaches us the power of restraint. Epictetus said, "We have 2 ears and 1 mouth, so that we can listen twice as much as we speak." That includes listening to the space between words, the silence that follows effort, the quiet that follows energy. But when you become quiet, she may begin to ask herself, was I listening when he was speaking? Did I appreciate his presence? Why does this stillness feel unfamiliar? That's the power of absence. Not because it demands answers, but because it gently brings awareness. It invites reflection, not just about you, but about the connection, the patterns, the imbalance. Your silence is not anger, it's not manipulation. It's simply the removal of noise, so the truth can emerge. It's a space where ego fades, and reality speaks. And often, it's in that very space where realizations begin to surface, not only for her, But for you too, you begin to see that peace doesn't always need to be explained. That sometimes, stepping back is the only way to move forward. That silence isn't empty, it's full of answers. And in that silence, if anything real was ever there, it rises. If it wasn't, then the silence confirms what words could never clarify. In a world full of noise, your quiet presence becomes a message, one that can't be ignored. 6. The calm man is always remembered in moments of tension. When emotions rise and tempers flare, most people react. They raise their voices. They try to control the moment. But amidst all the noise, the calm man stands out, not because he dominates, but because he doesn't need to. He doesn't chase attention. He doesn't try to prove himself. He listens, observes, and speaks only when necessary. That's what makes his presence unforgettable. Stoicism teaches us that self-control is the highest form of strength. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it, and this you have the power to revoke." A calm man understands this. He doesn't take things personally. He doesn't react to every provocation. When she remembers you, she may not recall every word you said, but she will remember how grounded you were. She will remember the steadiness in your voice when everything else felt unstable. She recall how you didn't try to control her, but you never lost control of yourself. That calm energy lingers longer than excitement. It builds trust. It commands respect. And most importantly, it creates contrast. In a world full of emotional volatility, the man who remains composed leaves a lasting impression. Your calm isn't weakness, it's refinement. It shows you've done the inner work. You've faced yourself. You've mastered the art of restraint. You've chosen peace over power struggles. Even if she didn't fully understand it then, your emotional discipline will stand out in her memory. Because calmness isn't forgettable, it's rare. And what's rare often becomes valuable only after it's gone. You weren't loud. You weren't desperate. You were stable. And that stability, whether appreciated in the moment or not, becomes something others reflect on long after. The calm man may walk away quietly, but his absence carries weight. Not because he made a scene, but because he didn't. And one day, when the noise fades and stillness returns, she remembered not what you said, but how you stayed composed. 7. She feels it when you no longer seek her. There was a time you reached for her. You showed interest. You asked how she was, waited for her replies, and even gave her more of your time than you gave yourself. Not because you were weak, but because you were genuine. You valued the connection. You believed in its worth. But when a man begins to evolve, he learns a deeper truth. Seeking someone who remains distant only creates imbalance. And the more you seek what doesn't seek you, the more disconnected from yourself you become. So, one day, without a dramatic goodbye or a cold withdrawal, you simply stop seeking. No announcement, no resentment, just stillness. And that stillness, she feels it. She notices that you're no longer first to text. She notices that you don't wait around for her replies. She senses that your attention, once consistent, has now returned to yourself. It's not about ignoring her. It's about no longer chasing where there is no mutual energy. This is where Stoicism comes in. As Epictetus said, freedom is the only worthy goal in life. It is won by disregarding things that lie beyond our control. You've stopped trying to control the outcome. You've stopped hoping she'll notice your effort. And in doing so, you've taken back your freedom. And ironically, this is when she begins to feel your absence the most. Not because you were loud, but because you were loyal. Not because you demanded anything, but because you once offered everything without condition. When you no longer seek her, it's not to provoke a reaction. It's because you finally remembered your worth doesn't depend on being chosen. It depends on being centered. And that centered man, quiet, focused, undistracted, is powerful. Not in a forceful way, but in a grounded, unshakable way. She may not show it. She may pretend everything is the same. But deep down, she feels the change. Because when genuine attention disappears, its absence is heavier than its presence ever was. And now, you seek nothing, not because you've given up, but because you've grown up. 8. Your absence is louder than words. You don't always have to say something to be heard. You don't always need to express how you feel. Sometimes, the most powerful message you'll ever deliver is silence backed by absence. When you stop showing up, stop reaching out, stop offering your energy, that silence speaks louder than anything you could have said. We live in a world where people often expect others to always be there, available, consistent, and sometimes that expectation makes them take your presence for granted. But when you quietly remove yourself, the balance shifts, the rhythm changes. She might not notice it at first. She may even believe nothing's changed. But slowly, over time, the subtle shift becomes real. The absence becomes noticeable, not just physically, but emotionally. That space where your care used to be now feels empty. You're no longer reminding her of your value. You're letting your absence reveal it. The Stoics taught us to detach from things not within our control. Marcus Aurelius once said, "The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury." In other words, don't react with noise, react with calm distance. Your absence doesn't beg, it doesn't argue, it doesn't compete. It simply removes itself from anything that was one-sided or unclear. And in that quiet departure, a realization begins to form. She may replay past conversations. She may scroll through old messages. She may even wonder why it feels different even if she won't admit it out loud. That's the paradox. You say the most by saying nothing at all. You're not avoiding her. You're not punishing her. You're simply choosing peace. And that choice becomes a powerful reflection for her. It invites her to see what was there when it was consistent, and what she now feels in its absence. Your silence creates contrast. It allows her to feel the space you once filled. And more often than not, that space speaks louder than presence ever could. You didn't walk away in anger. You just stopped showing up where you weren't valued. And now your absence has become a message. One she hears more clearly with each passing day. 9. Respect grows in distance. There's a deep truth that many ignore. Respect often doesn't grow in closeness, it grows in distance. When you're always available, always responding, always showing up, people may begin to see you as part of the background. Familiarity can lead to comfort, but too much comfort often leads to being taken for granted. But the moment you take a step back, not to hurt anyone, but to regain your center, something begins to shift. The silence becomes meaningful. The space becomes noticeable. And in that space, respect is either born or reborn. You're not distancing out of spite. You're creating boundaries out of self-awareness. As Epictetus taught, keep your attention focused entirely on what is truly your own concern, and be clear that what belongs to others is their business and none of yours. You're no longer trying to fix the dynamic. You're no longer trying to convince her of your worth. You simply withdraw with grace. And in that act, she begins to see something she couldn't see before. Your attention was rare. Your patience was intentional. Your presence was a privilege, not a promise. When you're gone, the energy you brought is no longer there to fill the silence. She feels the emptiness, not because you're punishing her, but because you've reclaimed your power. Distance makes her reflect. Reflect on how you handled things. Reflect on how you didn't react. Reflect on the depth you carried quietly. This is where true respect starts to take root. Not the kind that's asked for, but the kind that's earned. A man who doesn't beg to be seen, who isn't afraid to walk away with dignity, becomes unforgettable. His absence becomes a mirror, and often that mirror shows her what she failed to value. You're not playing games. You're practicing emotional clarity. Respect is not created by loud declarations or emotional displays. It is built when a man walks away silently because he knows his energy is sacred. In that space, either her respect will grow or your decision to let go will be confirmed. Either way, you win because you chose yourself without needing her to agree. * 10. Let her feel the silence. You once filled. You were once the voice in her day, the steady presence she could depend on, the thoughtful responses, the quiet concern, the attention that never asked for attention in return. You gave from a genuine place, no demands, no expectations, just presence. But when presence goes unappreciated long enough, a wise man learns to withdraw, not in anger, but in acceptance. And with that withdrawal comes silence. Not the kind that's cold or spiteful, but the kind that's powerful because it says, I no longer give where it's not valued. * This silence isn't empty. It's full of meaning. You're no longer reminding her you exist. You're allowing her to notice what your existence actually meant. * She may scroll through conversations. She may replay your voice in her memory. She may pause when she doesn't hear from you, but she won't hear anything, because that space, the one she used to overlook, is now completely quiet. * She may scroll through conversations. She may replay your voice in her memory. She may pause when she doesn't hear from you, but she won't hear anything, because that space, the one she used to overlook, is now completely quiet. Let her feel the silence. Let it echo. Let her realize that the things she brushed aside weren't small. They were the foundation of something real. And when that foundation disappears, even the strongest pride can start to shake. You don't have to block, chase, or post indirect messages. You simply live consistent, focused, and in your silence, she may begin to understand a truth she ignored. Real presence is not replaceable. You once filled the space with sincerity. Now the silence speaks for you. Let it speak. 11. Emotional detachment restores your power. There is a moment in every man's journey where he stops asking, "Why did she do this?" and starts asking, "Why did I allow it to affect me?" That moment is the beginning of emotional detachment. Not coldness, not bitterness, but clarity. And in that clarity, you begin to reclaim what was always yours, your inner power. Emotional detachment doesn't mean you don't care. It means you've stopped handing over your peace to things outside your control. You're no longer trying to decode her mixed signals or prove your worth. You simply step back, observe, and protect your energy. As Epictetus said, freedom is the only worthy goal in life. It is won by disregarding things that lie beyond our control. You can't control her feelings. You can't control her actions. But you can control how you respond, and more importantly, how much access you allow. In the past, maybe her silence made you anxious, her distance made you chase, her indifference made you question yourself. But now, emotional detachment becomes your shield. Her actions may still be confusing, but they no longer control your state of mind. You don't react, you don't chase, you don't over-explain, you return to yourself. This is where she starts to feel the shift. The same man who once reacted quickly is now still. The man who once overgave now sets limits. The man who once waited for her message now focuses on his own growth. And what happens next is powerful. Your silence becomes noticeable. Your absence becomes respected. And your emotional independence becomes attractive. Not because you're trying to get a reaction, but because you're finally living with self-command. A Stoic man doesn't need revenge, approval, or validation. He needs only one thing: discipline over his inner world. When you master that, you've already won. Emotional detachment isn't avoidance, it's wisdom. You still feel everything, but now, you no longer let those feelings control your choices. That's when the power returns. And that's when she begins to wonder how she ever lost the version of you that was willing to walk away peacefully, with dignity intact. 12. Never explain your silence. When a man chooses silence, the world often demands explanation. People wonder what happened. Some may think you're upset. Others may assume you're trying to manipulate. But a Stoic man knows, not everything requires a response, and silence needs no defense. Your silence is not a tactic. It's not a punishment. It's a boundary. A signal that you've moved inward, that your focus has returned home to your peace, your path, your purpose. As Marcus Aurelius said, the best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury. In this case, it means don't argue, don't prove, don't beg to be understood. You don't need to post long quotes about growth. You don't need to tell her you've changed. You don't even need to hint at the pain you carry. Your stillness is loud enough. Let it speak for you. The moment you feel the need to explain your silence, you've already made it about her again. And this journey, it's no longer about her. It's about your healing, your discipline, your decision to no longer leak energy. Where it isn't valued, she may reach out. She may ask, "Why are you quiet?" She may try to pull you back with guilt or curiosity. But you remain grounded, not cold, not distant out of spite, just peaceful, calm, composed. Because silence, when it comes from emotional clarity, isn't empty. It's full of decisions you don't need to announce. Let her feel what she once ignored. Let her sit with the absence of your effort. You don't need to clarify what your silence means. If she truly knew you, she'll understand it. If she didn't, then no explanation would ever be enough. Anyway, this is what true emotional strength looks like. No outbursts, no blame, no final speeches, just stillness, with self-respect at its core. Some will mistake it for indifference. Let them. You've outgrown the need to be seen as right. You now live in alignment with your own values. Never explain your silence. Let your absence speak with the dignity your words could never carry. 13. Silence breaks the illusion of control. In many relationships, control isn't loud. It doesn't always show up in commands or arguments. Sometimes it hides in small patterns: delayed replies to get a reaction, passive remarks to spark insecurity, emotional distance used as leverage, and slowly you begin to feel off balance, not because you're weak, but because you're responding to a rhythm someone else set. But here's what Stoicism teaches us: no one can control you unless you allow them access to your emotional responses. That's where silence becomes your greatest reset. The moment you stop reacting, the illusion of their control begins to collapse. The buttons they used to press no longer work. The expectations they held begin to fade, and they start to realize you've unplugged from their emotional script. Seneca once wrote, "He who is brave is free, and nothing is braver than breaking free from the invisible pull of someone else's emotional games." When you go silent, not to punish, but to protect, you shift the entire dynamic. You are no longer predictable. You are no longer playing the same emotional chess game. And suddenly, the person who thought they had control is left with questions instead of answers. This doesn't mean you ghost people. It means you choose stillness over reaction, clarity over chaos. You don't explain. You don't confront. You simply step back. In doing so, you remind both yourself and them that your peace is not up for negotiation. She may try to re-engage, test your silence, push boundaries to see if the old version of you is still there, but he's not. Because silence has given birth to a man who no longer participates in emotional tug-of-war. You are now grounded in your own center, calm, steady, focused. And here's the truth: people only control what you keep reacting to. The moment you stop, they're forced to face themselves instead of you. That's the quiet power of Stoic silence. It doesn't attack, it simply reveals. So let your silence do what words never could: break the cycle, reset the balance, reclaim your freedom. *14. You're not cold. You're clearing a world that equates kindness with constant availability. The moment you set boundaries, you're labeled as cold. The moment you stop overgiving, you're called distant. But here's the truth: you're not cold. You're just finally clear. You're no longer interested in repeating patterns that drain you. You're no longer chasing comfort in confusion. You're no longer ignoring your own needs just to keep peace. That's not indifference. That's emotional clarity. Clarity looks like silence after manipulation. It looks like walking away without argument. It looks like choosing solitude over superficial connection. As Epictetus said, first say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do. That means defining your values and protecting them without apology. You used to over-explain your boundaries. You used to justify your silence. You used to soften your truth so others wouldn't feel uncomfortable. Not anymore. Now, your energy is focused inward, not as a wall, but as a filter. You don't reject people, you just don't entertain confusion anymore. You don't chase affection, you observe intentions. Some will misread this shift. They'll call it ego. They'll say, "You've changed." Let them. What they're actually feeling is the absence of access they once had to your emotions. You've stopped giving without return. You've stopped engaging with unclear energy. This is what Stoic detachment looks like. Not emotionally dead, but emotionally disciplined. You feel everything, but you don't react to everything. She may interpret your silence as distance, but in truth, it's protection. It's the space where you re-enter. You've learned that peace is not something to be begged for, it's something you must fiercely guard. And in that clarity, you don't need to prove your growth. You live it, quietly, consistently. So no, you're not cold. You've just learned to stop giving explanations to those who never truly listened. You've stopped watering dead plants. You've stopped apologizing for prioritizing your mental balance. That's not cruelty, that's maturity. Let your clarity be misunderstood. You were never meant to be fully understood by those who benefit from your confusion. 15. Let her feel your calm, not your chaos. In moments of emotional tension, it's tempting to respond with urgency, to explain, to fix, to make her see your side. But the more you react in haste, the more power you give away. Stoicism teaches us that the strongest men don't respond with noise, they respond with calm. Because a woman doesn't remember what you said in panic. She remembers how she felt in your presence. She remembers whether your energy brought peace or pressure. And when you lead with calm, you give her something rare: emotional safety. Calm doesn't mean passive. It doesn't mean avoiding hard conversations. It means being steady, grounded, present without being reactive. You don't have to prove a point. You don't have to raise your voice. Your stillness says enough. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it." That means control your perception, and you control your response. So when she pulls away, let her. When she tests you, don't flinch. When she's uncertain, remain certain. In yourself, your calm becomes your compass. It tells her, this man doesn't beg for validation. It tells her, this man doesn't spiral when things shift. It tells her, this man is emotionally self-sufficient, and that is far more attractive than any words you could ever say. Let her feel your calm in your silence, in your patience, in your refusal to match chaos with chaos. You don't have to respond to every message right away. You don't have to react to every shift in mood. You don't have to prove your worth through emotional effort. Let her sit with your absence, not as punishment, but as a reminder of the peace she once felt when you were near. Because when she compares your steady presence to the noise of the world, she'll feel the difference. In the end, calm isn't weakness. It's leadership. It's mastery. It's the mark of a man who knows who he is and doesn't need chaos to feel important. Let her feel that. Let her miss that. Let her come back to that. Point 16. Growth begins when you stop explaining yourself. There was a time when you tried to explain everything: your silence, your distance, your needs, even your peace. You hoped that if she just understood, she would see your value more clearly. But the more you explained, the more she took it for granted. Until one day, you realized your growth is not a group discussion. The moment you stop explaining yourself is the moment you start respecting your path. You're no longer interested in convincing anyone why you've changed. You've simply changed, and those who are aligned with you will feel it without needing a word. Seneca said, "Let silence be your general rule, or say only what is necessary and in few words." This is the foundation of Stoic growth. Not everything needs to be defended. Not every feeling needs to be translated. You don't need to explain why you walked away, why you didn't reply, why your energy is focused inward now. You don't owe anyone a breakdown of your self-respect. When she asks, "What happened to you?" the answer is simple. You started listening to yourself. You no longer argue your worth. You no longer justify your distance. You no longer need agreement to validate your decisions. This quiet strength often gets misunderstood. Some will think you've become arrogant. Some will say you've changed. And they're right, you have. But not out of bitterness. Out of clarity. Growth is subtle. It's not about loud declarations. It's about silent standards. You start protecting your time. You start valuing your focus. You start choosing peace over performance. And in this space, you become untouchable, not because you've built walls, but because you've built wisdom. She'll notice the difference. She'll remember how you used to explain every pause, and now you just let the pause speak for itself. You've outgrown the need to be understood. Now you simply live in alignment with truth, with peace, and with purpose. That's the kind of growth that doesn't need to be announced. It's felt, it's noticed, it's remembered. 17. You don't chase. You choose. There was a time you believed that effort alone could win someone's heart. That if you just tried harder, stayed consistent, gave more of yourself, she would see your worth. But Stoicism teaches a deeper truth. A man of value doesn't chase. He chooses. Chasing is driven by need. Choosing is guided by clarity. When you chase, you give away your focus to someone else's approval. You measure your worth by how they respond. You bend your boundaries to stay relevant. And over time, you lose yourself in the pursuit. But when you choose, the energy shifts. You're no longer reacting to how she feels about you. You're observing how you feel around her. You're watching how she respects your time, your values, and your peace. You're deciding if she aligns with the man you're becoming. As Epictetus said, know first who you are, and then adorn yourself accordingly. You're not rejecting women. You're rejecting anything that pulls you away from self-respect. That's the difference between force and flow. Chasing is noise. Choosing is quiet. Chasing begs to be seen. Choosing lets presence speak. Now, your silence isn't passive, it's selective. You don't respond to every message. You don't engage every test. You don't try to fix every mood swing. Why? Because you've learned, not every connection deserves your energy. Not every woman is your match, and not every moment demands a response. When she feels that shifted, you're no longer chasing, but choosing. Everything changes. The control she once had dissolves. The expectation of your pursuit fades, and she begins to question what made you step back. That's not manipulation, that's maturity. You're not trying to be mysterious. You're being intentional. You no longer give your presence by default. It must be earned through mutual respect. This is where your power lives. You don't chase love, you choose alignment. You choose peace. You choose yourself. And in that stillness, you attract not those who want your attention, but those who value your essence. 18. She notices when you changed the pattern when you were consistent. She expected it. When you responded quickly, she got used to it. When you made time for her, even when she didn't ask, it became routine. But here's what Stoicism teaches. When your actions are predictable, they're often taken for granted, not because she's ungrateful, but because human nature becomes comfortable with patterns, and what's consistent often fades into the background. You were part of her rhythm until you changed the beat. You didn't announce it. You didn't make a scene. You simply paused. You responded slower. You prioritized your peace. And suddenly, the silence echoed louder than any message you could have sent. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury." In other words, stop playing the same emotional game. Shift the energy, not to punish her but to protect yourself. And when you do, she notices. She notices the gap where your attention used to be. She notices the stillness where your efforts once lived. She notices that you're no longer on standby, waiting to be needed. She may not say it out loud. Pride often wears a mask, but she feels the imbalance because here's the truth. Silence is not just the absence of noise. It's the presence of intention that you didn't disappear. You evolved. You didn't ghost her. You outgrew the pattern. You didn't shut her out. You chose to step back from what was costing you your peace. That's what makes the shift powerful. It's not loud, it's measured, it's grounded, and it speaks a language that only reflection can translate. Now, instead of reacting, she starts remembering the little things, the consistency, the calm energy you brought into her life, and slowly, the silence starts doing its quiet work, not by forcing her to miss you, but by showing her what your absence feels like. You've changed the pattern, not for her approval, but for your growth, and in doing so, you've reminded her your presence was never a given. It was always a gift. 19. You're not distant. Your discerning people often misread silence. They call it cold. They label it distant. They assume you're avoiding something. But the Stoic man knows you're not distant. You're discerning. You're not avoiding her, you're observing her. You're not pulling away in anger, you're creating space for truth to surface, Seneca wrote. If a man knows not to which port he sails, no wind is favorable. When you're emotionally reactive, you're like a ship tossed by every wave. Her mood swings, her mixed signals, her shifting attention. But when you become discerning, you stop reacting. You start noticing. You notice how she shows up in your life. You notice if her words match her actions. You notice whether she brings peace or drains your energy. This isn't emotional detachment. This is emotional clarity. And clarity requires space. So when she reaches out and you take your time to respond, that's not rudeness. That's awareness. When you no longer explain yourself in detail, it's not coldness. It's confidence. When you don't fight for her attention, you're not bitter. You're just no longer blind. In this season, you protect your energy not because you're angry, but because you're awake. You've seen what happens when you give too freely. You've seen how being available can turn into being overlooked. So now, you choose stillness over chasing. Presence over performance, discernment over desperation. And yes, she notices the difference at first. She might test it, push your buttons, see if the old version of you still exists, but the new you no longer dances for breadcrumbs. You've raised your standard, not just for her, but for yourself. And that shift in your energy is undeniable. Not aggressive, not dramatic, just quietly firm now. She's left wondering, why does his silence feel stronger than my words? Because you've stopped being emotionally available by default. You've become emotionally disciplined. You're not shutting people out. You're filtering who gets in. You're not distant. You're discerning. And that difference is everything. 20. You become her lesson, not her possession. There comes a moment when you realize you were never meant to be someone's possession. Not a trophy, not a backup, not a comfort zone. You were meant to be a standard, a reflection, a quiet awakening. Epictetus taught, we suffer not from the events in our lives, but from our judgment about them. And sometimes, A woman judges your value not by who you are, but by how often you're around. She forgets that your consistency was a choice, that your patience was a gift, that your calm presence was something rare. So when you finally withdraw, not out of resentment, but out of realizations, something changes suddenly. The man she once took for granted becomes the man she can't replace. Your silence becomes her mirror. Your detachment becomes her consequence. Your growth becomes her lesson. You didn't leave to prove a point. You left because you finally saw yours. You stopped trying to be understood by someone who wasn't listening. You stopped offering clarity to someone who only wanted control. You stopped showing up for someone who didn't value your presence until it turned into absence. And in doing so, you became what Stoics strive for: self-governed, anchored, unshakable. Now, instead of belonging to someone who never truly saw you, you belong to yourself. Your energy is no longer up for negotiation. Your attention is no longer handed out freely. Your value is no longer explained, it's felt in your absence. She may tell herself stories that you changed, that you stopped caring, that you drifted away. But deep down, she knows you were always there. She just didn't see you until you were no longer standing in front of her now. Your name might not come up in conversation, but your absence lives rent-free in her memory. Not because you tried to make her regret anything, but because you chose self-respect over repetition. You didn't become her enemy. You became her reflection, and in the silence you left behind, she finally learned you were never hers to keep. You were the lesson she had to lose to understand.